Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
Exceptionally grateful to be here, Rory. You have tuned in to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. This is episode 199. And today we've got 3 stops on our journey, starting off with our Counselling Foundations, where we're going to be looking at empathy. We then move on to a focus on self, where we're going to be speaking about being resilient within your practice or within your placement work or even within your studies. And then into practice matters, where we are going to hear from Emma Chapman, who did a recent CPD lecture on us on maternal mental health. And Rory is going to be sharing an interview with Emma. Loads of great content there. But back to those foundations, Rory, which is kind of a new section where we revisit and recognize that it is the basics, the foundations of counselling on which we build. And today, speaking about empathy, I think that really is going to the foundation. It's interesting. Empathy is something you would learn as a brand new student coming in, studying counselling. You'd be told about empathy. Yet empathy is something you will be using within your sessions right up until the last session you ever have.
Absolutely, Ken. And I think one of the things you talked about, students coming into practice, maybe they're starting for the first time. And one of the things that is very quickly unpicked is the difference between sympathy and empathy.
Oh, yes.
And it's interesting. I found a really good quote by the writer and inspirational speaker, Brené Brown. I think that's the way he pronounce her name. And she says, sympathy is feeling for someone, well, empathy is feeling with them. No better description, is it, of both of those activities?
Yeah, and I like how you've brought that in. You know, we speak about autonomy when we speak about counselling. We speak about the client being in control of this journey that they reach out to go on in the first place because maybe they're feeling some weight or they're going through something in their life. And, you know, the client is there to feel their own feelings. We're not there to feel those feelings for them. We feel with them. We accompany them on that journey. It is disempowering to feel something for a client. They can feel it themselves. And that's what counselling is about. And, you know, when I think of sympathy versus counselling, I think of sympathy is feeling sorry for someone. Feeling sorry.
Oh, that must be awful. I can feel that. I can feel people's hackles rising now.
I know. We get the letters. The letters are going to come pouring in now. Yeah. But we're using this to kind of to illustrate what we're talking about here. And empathy is interesting because when I was looking at the topic for today, Rory, you wrote down empathy as a skill, and I guess empathy is a kind of a skill, but it is also, as Carl Rogers would say, a way of being. So it is something that is taught on counselling courses. But it's interesting, is it? Can you really teach empathy, or is it something that is just innate within one?
I've always said, and I stick by this, that empathy is not really a skill. It's useful. Its use is skillful, I have to say. Because it fits in with the kind of skill set a therapist has, but it's not a skill. It's not something that's taught. People either have empathy, or in some cases, people don't. Some people are born without the capacity to empathise with others, but it can be enhanced. I think that through training, it's enhanced, and I also think that it's rather like a bit like operating a volume control on the radio, in that you could turn it up and down depending on what your client needs. So sometimes, you know, you could be incredibly empathic with somebody when they're really, really in difficulty, but sometimes it's not overdoing it. I think it's always meeting the client where they are. And I think the one person who really understood what empathy was Carl Rogers. And he said, when empathy is extended, it satisfies our needs and wishes for intimacy. It rescues us from our feelings of aloneness. And from the client's perspective, that's exactly what it is. And it speaks strongly to the idea that as therapists, we don't listen to our clients, we hear them. It's a very subtle difference.
Oh, I like that. I like that. And I think in when you're speaking about subtle differences as well, being empathic is different to empathy. Empathy is a result of being empathic. And it's so interesting with the example that you used there of a client feeling heard. And if we just go back to that first place where we started speaking about sympathy, if a client was to kind of share a real difficult time that they were going through, and a sympathy response would be, well, it's not that bad. You can probably get through this. That would be sympathy, trying to rescue them from the difficulty they're in because you feel sorry for them and you don't want them to be there going through that difficulty. Whereas an empathic response, empathy, would be to say, you know what, I see that difficult time you're going through. That must be really tough with you. I can hear as you're telling me how you're struggling with that you're going through right now. There's no rescuing in that. It is empathic. It is standing next to them saying, I see this with you. I'm not trying to fix it. I'm saying, yes, I recognize it. And in that client gets heard. And when they get heard, that's where the magic is. Like you've just used in the quote there, I no longer feel alone. And empathy is something that takes a relationship in order to develop. We go in and maybe in that first session with a new client, someone we haven't seen before, that it will be difficult to have an empathic relationship in the beginnings because trust needs to form for the person to release the guards, to accept the empathy. So we can go into that session and we can be empathic. In other words, we are radiating an empathic way of being. But the truth of empathy is a circle. It is only when the client perceives that we are being empathic towards them. They perceive that as empathy and go, yes, I'm being heard. It breaks through that barrier. They lower that barrier. They trust what is coming towards them. And when they perceive that we are with them, that we are feeling that with them, then the empathy is created.
Oh, obviously, beautiful words, Ken. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful words. It's so true. And the thing is that empathy takes commitment. To offer empathy takes commitment. Sympathy can be kind of used in a situation and you can just walk away from it. Oh, that must have hurt. Oh dear. That kind of sympathy. Empathy means that you're really investing yourself in the person sat in front of you. You're really sitting, you're listening intently. You're trying to get into that person's shoes, literally into their skin. You won't be able to do it completely, but it takes commitment. It takes energy. And I think that's something that, I certainly taught when I was a lecturer to say, it's an investment. You have to invest yourself in the client. And I think that sometimes that idea isn't kind of amplified enough, I don't think, in sometimes in training, or certainly in some of the conversations I've heard. It's about investment, and it means that you're giving yourself selflessly. It's not about your frame of reference, it's about somebody else's, and you're trying as hard as you can to see the world as they see it. It takes a lot of commitment, and that is why I guess empathy as a skill is training people to develop that form of commitment and that kind of investment in who they're listening to.
Yeah. Now, it goes back to that debate, doesn't it, of can empathy really be taught? And you spoke about neurological conditions where people will report to not having empathy or understanding that. So we can look to that side of things. But when we look to empathy, we are, I guess, as a biological species, we are wired to be empathic. And I guess that is because our survival is based on us being able to socially integrate with one another, work collaboratively, and for that an element of empathy needs to exist. So that's from an evolutionary point of view. So empathy is something that we have in the same way as we breathe. Now you can do breathing practice techniques and you can do empathy practice techniques as well. And one of the ways of kind of really practicing an empathic stance is about frame of reference. It's about rather than when somebody is speaking or where a message is coming in, thinking how that relates to me, myself. I hear something, I think, oh, that's interesting. I went on a holiday there as well. I wonder if they saw the Eiffel Tower, because when I was there, I saw the Eiffel Tower. I'm not in whatever story is coming towards me. I'm in my own frame of reference. And within our own frame of reference, there is no empathy. We have to be in the frame of reference of another, because empathy is something that is directed outwards. We don't have internal empathy. We can feel sorry for ourselves, but it's difficult to have self-empathy. So one way, I guess, of practicing, if we can call it a skill, because there are practices you can do that will maybe hone it or sharpen that, would be to think about frame of reference. Think about what is coming up for me when a certain person says a certain thing, and can I separate that and be with what they are bringing, I guess. And a great place to practice this, if you are a student of counselling, is in your practice discussion or your PD group, your personal discussion group, or in your process group, whatever you call that, where you may spend an hour in a circle or in a situation listening to peers and their journey and what they're going through and what they're bringing. And that is a great place to listen empathically, to practice that empathic listening, and from a feeling point of view, really connect with what the speaker is bringing up. And if you find that somebody brings something up that makes you a little bit irritated, there is a great exercise in, now there's something that came up within me. If I am irritated within, I'm not in their frame of reference. I must be in mine, because I'm the one irritated here. And there we can start practicing those finer points, I guess, of understanding ourselves to better able present an empathic condition within our counselling sessions.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. This is where it gets enhanced and sharpened within training. I think probably, as a skill, it's a personal quality that's sharpened up, and we become more aware of and more able to use. Another good way, I think, of developing empathy is to read biographies. I can remember, and I've spoken about this on the podcast, reading Maya Angelou's book, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Seminal, absolutely seminal book. And I swear that when I was reading that book, I could actually taste the dust in my mouth of Stamps, Arkansas, that dusty place where Angelou was brought up, and also the fear and worry of being that person. Now, I couldn't actually be her, but the writing was so intense. How she was speaking in the book was so intense that you can develop empathy. And I used to recommend, and I still recommend, if you want to develop empathy, read a biography and see if you can get into that person's skin. And, you could practice to yourself the kind of responses that you'd use. But a really good way of kind of losing yourself in another I think is a good biography.
I like that. Thank you for sharing that, Rory. And Rory has created a super duper handout. That's what we call them. It's a handout about empathy. And it's not just about plain old empathy. He's gone one step further. It's about idiosyncratic empathy. And you can get today's free handout by going to counsellingtutor.com, because that's our mother website. In the very top menu bar, find the part that says podcasts. Click on that and go to episode 199. That's today's episode. And right there from within the page, you will be able to download the idiosyncratic empathy document. Wow, tongue twister there. Got to be careful how you say idiosyncratic empathy. And it's a really great handheld document. You can print that out. It's great for referencing if you're doing assignments or anything like that, or even if you just want to kind of revisit those basics. Well, that's what we're saying here. The Counselling Foundations. That is empathy. And of course, idiosyncratic empathy just refers to empathy and how that might be different from one client to another. I might meet with you, Rory, and I will have one kind of empathy when my daughter tells me something. that empathy may be very, very different in how it presents, and that is the idiosyncrasy of empathy. Great handout, go and get that. And of course, that handout is taken directly from our counselling study resources. The counselling study resources is a library. It's a absolutely humongous, a mammoth library full with lectures, handouts, and resources, some assignment exemplars as well. And that library is there to help students on their study journey. And you can get more information about the counselling study resource at counsellingtutor.com. So as we kind of move on from our counselling foundations onto that focus on self, Rory, recognizing that we as the practitioner form the heart of our practice, whether we be a student in placement. It is you there, your practice from the moment you have your first second with a client. It is your practice. No matter what your modality is, it is still you that is at the heart of your practice. And today, when we focus on self, we're asking that question about resilience. And what do you do to be resilient in your practice? But I guess to paint the picture, what are we saying when we say resilient, Rory?
Well, I think the best way to describe it would be a direct quote from the BACP ethical framework under personal and moral qualities. And it says resilience is the capacity to work with a client's concern without being personally diminished. I think that's probably the best quote on counselling resilience as I've come across. And it's the idea that we can work with that very, very difficult material that sometimes clients bring. Sometimes, if I'm speaking to people and they say, what do you do? And I say, I'm a counsellor. And they say, listening to other people's problems is usually the kind of things that sometimes people say. And really, it's not. It's listening to some of the darkest, most difficult, most frightening aspects that a human being can experience. Yeah. And being there. And I often think of it, Ken, like being a lighthouse. You are a lighthouse. And you're surrounded by the sea, and that sea is the client's emotions. And sometimes they can whip up and crash, and we have to be that. We have to be that strong in the chair person who can withstand these waves of strong emotion and be consistent like a lighthouse is. And I think that can take a lot of work. And I think it takes a lot of supervision. And I can remember in my very early practice, I had a client who disclosed a very difficult part of her early childhood. I'll leave it there because we have we don't know who's listening, age group we're listening, but very, very difficult and very harrowing. And I can remember thinking, I can't do this. I can't do this. I was really, really struggling with it. And I went to my supervisor and I said, I'm not sure this is the job for me. And my supervisor at the time, who I have to say, I loved her dearly, and I've spoken about her a lot in the past on the podcast, was a bit like a regimental sergeant major. And she helped me understand that the problems that I was listening to weren't mine. Before checking that they weren't mine, she said, have you ever experienced anything like this in your life personally? I said, no. So she said, so this is something that resonates with you personally? I said, no. She said, these are the client's problems. And she guided me and helped me become more resilient. And I guess that what she taught me was adaptive resilience and the ability to be resilient on the spot, and also something called learned resilience, where we draw on our own strength. But we do need to be resilient in practice because we're not hearing other people's problems. We're hearing other people's lives and the pain and the sometimes the anguish of the other in front of us. Yeah,
and there's maybe a way of looking at this, thinking, oh well, then to be resilient, I just have to be really strong. Ooh. You were speaking about the lighthouse, Rory, and when I'm thinking about a lighthouse, I'm thinking about how strongly it's built. Those waves can come. It's not going to move that lighthouse. But we are human. We are just human. So it's about training. And it's about putting the right things in around us. It's not a strength of character thing, resilience. No. It is something we strive towards, and and we put the right things in place in order to be resilient. And it starts with our last topic. So we started episode 199 today looking at those counselling foundations, and we were speaking about empathy. And you're sharing, Rory, how clients will they don't just bring a narrative, they bring the real thing. They've lived through this. And when we're speaking about empathy, we're there next to them. We're trying to look through their frame of reference and feel what it feels like to be them within their situation. However, there is a little caveat that goes with empathy. There's a little saying, it's like walking in the client's shoes. However, as you always said when I was one of your students, Rory, what have you got to remember to keep on?
Your socks.
Your socks, because it is your socks that separate your feet from the client's shoes. They are not your shoes. It is the client's material. Yes, we do share that journey empathically with them for a period of time, but as they leave the therapy room, they take with them that they brought into the therapy room. It is their material that we empathically receive. We work with them on their journey and what they bring, but as they leave, they take that with them. And it is when a client leaves and you, after doing your process notes and maybe seeing another client or two or a little bit further in the day, you still have this narrative banging around in your head, or you're still feeling feelings from what this client may have brought. This is a great indication that something has stuck with you, that you are carrying something from that client's presentation. And you said it as we went into this, Rory, good supervision. That's where that sits. Good supervision. That's something to take to your supervisor, speak about it. And that's why supervision is part of our resilience. That is one very important, vital part of what we do, is our supervision.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I have a 48-hour rule. My 48-hour rule is that if I'm still thinking about a client, still really having tense feelings around what the client's brought 48 hours after I've seen them, that is the time to book a quick supervision.
Yeah,
because that client is still there. And I think it's really interesting. It's one of, resilience and people talking about working with clients or sort of, how that process may be, not speaking about client material, is something that comes up in our Facebook page quite often. And if you're not a member of our Facebook page, go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor. It's a closed group, so if you knock on the door, we'll let you in. Our wonderful moderation team will let you in, and you can join thousands of like-minded people, students, practitioners, supervisors. There's a soup song of tutors in there, all talking about the world of counselling and psychotherapy. Come on in and join us. But it is a topic that does repeat itself throughout the years.
Very much so. And just speaking about the Facebook group, it kind of leads me on to another aspect of resilience. So we've covered the vital importance of supervision. Sharing with peers, speaking with peers. Now, I'm not speaking about taking the material that the client brought to you. Of course, that is confidential, but you can share with a peer. I had a client recently who brought some heavy material, and that's still banging around inside my head. You don't have to share what that material is, but you can just speaking it, just telling another human being, not pretending it's not happening. And if I close my eyes really tight, it's going to go away.
No.
Verbalize it, share with your peers. That is another little island you can have for your resilience, is sharing the journey with peers and talking about things that stick around with you. Because I would imagine that you're going to have others that have experienced the same kind of thing, and they may share some of the techniques that they may have used. Meditating, walking, mindfulness, great ways to deconnect from the thinking brain for a little moment, which tends to quieten that down. And then I think really important, for us to be resilient, we need a really good self-care regime that includes good, regular breaks. We need time to get away from what the presentations that come to us, the heavy material that we may deal with. We need time to go away, to be with our families or be with ourselves and just decompress. And when I'm saying time, not just 2 days, a long weekend here and there, proper leave where you step out of practice for a little while. Of course, you make all the arrangements for that with your clients. It's managed self-care, so important in developing a resilient practitioner.
Absolutely. And even the strongest of lighthouses needs the bulb changing and a lick of paint and some maintenance. You know, I can go to lighthouses and they're just sitting in a very calm sea, nothing happening, and there's people working on them, changing the bulb and pointing the brickwork up and making sure they don't crumble. Lighthouses don't stay up because they're made strong. They stay up because they're looked after. And I think that's a metaphor that you can think about for yourselves. Self-care is an essential ingredient in being a healthy and effective practitioner.
So there it is. Speaking about resilience, that focus on self. And I wonder, Rory spoke about the Facebook group. Get on Facebook, put in Counselling Tutor if you're not a member. If you are a member, log into the Facebook group. Maybe share some of the things you do for yourself to kind of enhance your resilience. And again, it's not about us being extra strong or extra willpower. It's about what we put around us that helps us with our resilience. The peers that we share the journey with, our supervisor that we share the journey with, our self-care regime. Maybe share a little bit about how you work on your resilience. And then we kind of move now onto Practice Matters. Practice Matters, this is our final stop for episode 199 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. And Practice Matters is where we look at something we may come across within our practice, within our day-to-day, from a client presentation or something that we may need to know to run our practices. And today, I think something really important and so likely to walk into your therapy room if it hasn't at some stage during your practice, and that is maternal mental health. And Rory, you met up with Emma Chapman, who recently did a lecture in our counsellor CPD library on maternal mental health.
Absolutely, Ken. And not only a lecture, but she discussed her own master's degree research, and as part of that, she talked to women about the transition into motherhood and the reality of it. And it was really interesting, and I think it's going to be a great help to practitioners who are working with new mothers who may have some difficulty, and also to people who might be listening to this who are going to be new mothers.
Practice Matters.
And we welcome Emma Chapman, a good friend of Counselling Tutor, someone I personally like spending time with, fantastic practitioner and lecturer. And you've just recorded a fab lecture for the Counsellor Study Resource and the Counsellor CPD Library on maternal mental health. So Emma Chapman, welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me again, Rory. And for saying such lovely things about me. I'll take it. That was lovely. Thank you.
It's all true. Now, you're basically in this lecture talking about your research. This was your dissertation research, wasn't it? Maternal mental health. So my first question is, what drew you to doing this research?
So, if I'm honest, it was my own personal experiences. When I became a mum, that was the point when I really started to struggle with my own mental health. And, there was a lot of things that led to that. But I think I came to understand that a lot of the difficulties I was having was because I was trying to be this perfect mum that we see in the media, that all these Facebook posts expect us to be. And I wasn't really succeeding, and I certainly wasn't feeling the way I thought a mum ought to feel about becoming a mum. So I found it all really quite a difficult process. And nobody really spoke to me about the fact that it's a massive transition and it takes a lot of getting used to becoming a mum.
Absolutely. There's a lot of external pressure, certainly driven through social media and these idealized kind of images of how women are mothers and all the other myriad of roles that they're asked to play, and fairly or unfairly, my view is sometimes very, very unfairly, and from your own experience, that developed your research. So, what was the hypothesis? What was the hypothesis of your research? What were you hoping to find out?
So the research was about ambivalent feelings towards motherhood, and that's a big long title, which basically means having loving and hating feelings about becoming a mum.
Yes.
And it was about really how women dealt with those feelings. And what I found when I started the research was that women don't deal very well with those difficult feelings about motherhood because they don't feel like they can talk about them anywhere, and they feel really deeply ashamed about having negative feelings about becoming a mum. You know, when actually what you and I know, Rory, is that with any transition, there comes loss and grief and sadness. You know, that's inevitable, isn't it? So becoming a mum is just another transition, and
Yes.
there is loss and there is sadness and there is some grief often involved in that. But there's nowhere to go with that. There's nobody to talk to, and women feel like or the women that I spoke to in my research felt like they couldn't bring this anywhere without being judged as being bad mums.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting observation. I've always thought, and I've thought for a long time, there's this 1950s gloss that's applied on motherhood, this idyllic standing there with the baby in full makeup, fully in control of every aspect of your life, and then you just off you go as a woman.
Yeah.
Off you go, you get on with it. And I you know, I don't know if this was your experience or the experience of your participants, but any kind of comment or observation on, you know, it's not like that, and I don't feel it's so great, is sometimes not well received, is it, by those around them?
No. And that was my experience personally. You know, when I spoke to my health visitor about the fact I wasn't feeling so great, you know, it was kind of dismissed as baby blues. And then there was talk about postnatal depression, and it actually, nobody just said this is a transition and it's going to take some time, and you know, and actually, no, you can't just arrange to go out to the pub with your friends, and no, you can't, you know, all this stuff. And I think women have sold this idea that we can have it all now, and that, you know, and I honestly really thought, and I think this was an experience that I heard often, that when a baby comes into the world, you know, it'll fit into your life and you'll be able to continue. And then, of course, a baby comes into your world, and we don't live in the same communities we lived in before, where you would be helping, you know, sisters and cousins, and, you know, and there would be a lot of interaction with babies. And I remember walking through the door, I say this in the lecture, with my baby, and looking at her and thinking, okay, what now? Like, I don't even know if I can put her down. Is she allowed to be put down somewhere? You know, just feeling so lost. So yeah, really, really difficult kind of, really difficult moment where you feel like, I think you have an expectation that naturally all of these things will come to you and you'll just become a mum when this baby comes out. You're going to become this amazing mum. But of course, it doesn't. Then you feel like a failure.
Yeah, yes, and you know, this idea that you have this built-in instruction book that activates as soon as you give birth, exactly. and you have all the answers, and you know, I obviously I'm a man. I hope it's obvious, but you know, I'm a man, so I can't comment directly on these things. It would be wrong for me. But I do have two experts that are very close to me, my wife and my daughter, both who have given birth, and they would echo much the same. They would echo exactly the same thing. There's this expectation that motherhood is some form of inbuilt kind of process where mothers have all the answers, and your research kind of reinforced your own experience.
My research, what was really interesting about it is what I found. I interviewed women who had older children to see if I suppose looking back in retrospect, it's a bit easier, isn't it, to look at things that happened when you're not in the middle of it. And what these women said was that they never really let go of these ambivalent feelings towards motherhood. They always kind of struggled with being a mum and, finding a balance with being a mum and the other parts of them and their roles and their life. But what they did find was that they grew to accept these ambivalent feelings in time. Once the children were older, once they recognized their children were actually okay, once other women started talking about it, which only really happens often when the kids are older, they all of a sudden started to think, oh, it's okay that I had those difficult feelings, and they kind of forgave themselves for those difficult feelings. They didn't go away. That wasn't the solution. It was just more of an acceptance. And I suppose my argument is, if society can accept that more, those ambivalent feelings more, how much easier is it going to make women's lives?
Absolutely. And I think it's something that does come up in therapy a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I've spoken to colleagues who've had, female clients who've come and said that they're feeling really bad because they may love their children, but they may not like them very much because they keep them awake. They're very demanding, and their lives have changed forever. They're not it's not a very popular thing to express in our society, is it?
It really isn't, no. It's very controversial, and I've found, because I do a little bit of training on this in particular, on my research in particular, and I've had some quite negative feedback about it from women, as well as men, who really object to what they perceive as me being so negative about motherhood. When actually, I think, like any relationship, we have a relationship with our child and we expect it to be magical, but it is a relationship. And like any relationship, there are times when I absolutely love my husband, and there are times when I really don't want to be near him. And it's the same with any relationship. It's complicated, and it isn't all love all of the time. It's a mixture of feelings, and we just need to be more realistic about that and more accepting of that.
I like the idea of being more realistic. I think that a lot of mental health or poor mental health is generated from unrealistic expectations, whether from others or whether from society, or usually from self.
Self from those internalized kind of often those community expectations, those societal expectations that have become internalized, haven't they? And they've become our own expectations of self.
Yes.
So I think it all needs to change, Rory. Let's start a revolution.
Well, I think this podcast is going to help that. I'm sure there's going to be people listening out there who think, me too. I never thought anyone else had those feelings. So, I thank you for bringing that, because it does take in our society, it does take courage to voice that kind of contrary opinion to what is sometimes, as I use the term, this 1950s gloss of motherhood. So when people watch your lecture, what do you hope they'll take away from it? What do you hope they'll take away into their practices?
I really would like counsellors to be able to make space for these feelings, to acknowledge them when they see them, to normalize these feelings, to be able to say to their clients, when they think these feelings might be going on. Some people, when they become mums, really struggle with that transition, and they find parts of motherhood to be not particularly satisfying, and actually they can really hate those parts of motherhood. Just kind of really give that space, open it up. Let's just normalize these feelings for our clients.
Yeah, let's tell the truth.
Let's tell the truth. I love that. Let's tell the truth. Exactly that.
Well, Emma, it's always a pleasure talking to you. So, Emma Chapman, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Big thank you there to Emma Chapman, and of course to you, Rory, because you take your time to meet up and produce these little snippets so that we can learn more. And there we learned about that maternal mental health. And of course, if you want to see Emma's complete lecture, you can do so by logging into the Counsellor CPD library. If you're not a member of the Counsellor CPD library and you want some more information on that, you can get all the information you need at counsellingtutor.com right on our home page. That, Rory, was episode 199 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
And we started off with Counselling Foundations, a skill of empathy, where we talked about what empathy is, how it's received and delivered from both the client's frame of reference and also the practitioner's frame of reference. Focus on self, being resilient in practice, making sure that the work we do doesn't diminish us. And finally, Emma Chapman talked about maternal mental health and the challenges that those who are going to be mothers have. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counselor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counselor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counselor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.